Okay. Hello, my little cheese flavored snacks and various healthy crudités. Um, this is Tad. I'm here. You are there. We are all where we should be. At least I presume so. Um, Good to see you. It's Sunday evening here. It is 7 p.m. exactly. Um, was is the day after daylight savings or the day of daylight savings, and so my body is somewhat confused. Saw an interesting piece that apparently after daylight savings, things like heart attacks and stuff go up in that day, whether because of lack of sleep or sudden confusion of schedule or whatever. And I don't know what the actual percentages are. I was under the impression that this was going to change a long time ago, but people asked me about it actually during an earlier reading. I think the last time we changed times, people were like, weren't they supposed to end daylight savings time? And can only speak for Americans, but that was what I heard, and then nothing happened. So shocking, but that does seem to be the way it is here. Either nothing happens when you want it to happen, or horrible things happen when you don't want them to happen. Not to be unnecessarily negative, but there you go. That's kind of the nature of reality. It's always a few scales down from what you hoped for. But anyway, I am here. You are there. We are wherever we are, and I am going to check in and see who's checked in so far. It says 12 comments. So let's see. It's just obliterated the comments, of course, by merely clicking on them to see who had made them. Kristen, hello, Kristen. I see that Kristen is here. Tim, hello, Tim. Good to see you. That's Tim Speckens. Medardo Landon, Matza Dueñas. Hola, señor. Mucho gusto. Es un placer verte. Who else we got? Isaac. Hello, Isaac. Isaac is in. Kelly Kenrick is in the house. Tracy McClatchy is in the house. Hello, Tracy. Ivan, my old buddy. And Ron, my not quite as old but still very good buddy. Good to see you. Claudia, hello. And Becca. And Christy. And that's Christy Sanders and Susan Shamblin are the ones who've checked in so far. I'm sure there are others, but those are people who've written quotes, written comments. Excuse me. Anyway, nice to see everybody. I am, except for the fact, oh, let me turn the air filter thing on, because of course I am in the basement of disaster, living with the two cats of doom. And I just realized I've been down here for 15, 20 minutes getting ready, and the air is swimming with cat dander. So that's what's going on. That's why I sound like this, like I have a cold in my nose. But now I've got the air filter on. That will quickly change it. It's nothing abnormal, folks. I don't use a special air filter or something. It's just one of those little floor models. So I don't want anybody going like, oh my God, does he have to use that all the time? No, it's just in a room with one especially long-haired cat and one shorter-haired cat, but they do manage to fill the room with fuzz. Okay, what else to talk about? Well, not a huge amount. I mentioned last night that I had been running around doing family stuff yesterday, and that I did. And then today I did very little. So not really much to tell. Still, everything is pretty much where it was as of last night or early this morning, when I said, working on the second half of the Navigator's Children copy edit and getting ready to go back to the Ordinary Farm third book, which I was almost finished with when the copy editing stuff started. And that's the problem with things like copy editing and, in fact, the publishing process is it is a big grinding machine. And to keep it going, since many people are waiting on its products, when you get something, you have to drop everything and deal with it. So that's what I've been doing and will be doing for at least another week, probably a bit longer. And but I'm itching to get back and finish that and get started on the Splintered Sun, which, as I think I mentioned last night, I've been thinking about which has its value in the sense that it will probably shorten or ease some of the problems of writing, but it won't fix them completely. Because any book, any story has its own complications. So I'll be figuring those out. Anything else that I felt needed to be talked about? Oh, there's so much going on in the world and in writing, and these days I just don't know when I will have time to do much of anything other than just sort of the bare minimum of getting the work done and stuff like that. This is a constant complaint of mine, and I know I sound very boomerish when I say this, even though I am just barely a boomer. But the whole idea of the information age revolution making everything easier turned out to be such a load of tripe. I remember in the early days, way back when, here now we're talking, before some of you may have been born, but back in the 1980s, I was working at Apple Computer, and Apple had instituted a company-wide, what we would now call, email or social media or what. I mean, it was, the early days of a company-wide communications network where everybody could write to everybody else and send people files and stuff. Although, early days, it was very complicated trying to send files. But the reason I'm mentioning it is that we as a society heard about how email, electronic information was going to make everything so much easier and destroy the need for paper. And in fact, my friend who worked at Apple with me and I basically just kept all of the paper that we got for like half a year and just piled up reams and reams of this stuff. And meanwhile, we were still having to answer things in electronic mail as well, because of course nobody trusted pure electronic mail. So I figured out even back then that this is not really going to be easier for us at any point along the line. And in fact, it wasn't. But it was not that people failed to trust electronic transmission of information. It was that as electronic mail and electronic file transfer and all this stuff became more common, people kept shortening up the time they expected to hear from you, and shortened up the time they expected you to get back to them about things, and shortened up their set of social expectations. Parents shortened up their ideas of how often they'd have to hear from their kids and how quickly the kids would have to respond to queries and things like that. And before you know it, we find ourselves living in a society where, if you don't return somebody's text, in many cases you're getting, follow-up texts like, "Are you okay?" or "Are you mad at me?" or, whatever. I still remain, like many sensible people, I still remain very old school. I am, and it's only partially because of my age. But yes, because of how I am and how I grew and the society I was raised in, the expectation that I have to immediately provide information to people is still foreign to me. And that people will assign a meaning to how fast I get them information, that is still foreign to me. But even not as a boomer, but just as any kind of a human being, I don't necessarily want people to be able to reach me 24 hours a day. I don't necessarily want people to be able to send me things that I don't know, and all this kind of stuff. So it's of course, this is how it works. We had mail, we got junk mail. We had telephones, we got telemarketing. We live in a society where people are bombarding you day and night with electronic information of one kind or another. Some of it, you volunteer for, or you go out and search for news and things like that. But much of it is just now an institutional process. And there are times where I just say, I'm not going to answer this. It doesn't seem that important to me if I even see it. I don't carry my phone 24/7. Sometimes I put it down somewhere and go do something, especially work, because I don't want it next to me going pring every 5 seconds, while my family is having a conversation about what kind of food they should get in 6 hours and stuff like that. But, the combination of all these things means that just the pressure has ramped up to the point where I don't know about you or any of you out there or anybody out there who may see this later on, but I think a lot of us just feel like we have less time than we ever had. And part of that is because, like water, which flows in to fill every crack, which finds its level but also spreads out into any place it can, electronica and electronic information does the same thing, especially in a society like the one we live in, a capitalist society where, monetizing everything and making money off of everything is super, super important. And in fact, what drives the whole society, and which nobody seems to ever stop, well, not nobody, but very few people ever stop to think about and say, why is this the best possible way to go? Now, brief aside, don't get me wrong. I do believe in, because I'm an evolutionist. I'm somebody who thinks evolution is a much bigger natural force than just the thing that turns frogs into different kinds of frogs, or that turned our ape-like ancestors into human-like ancestors, or things like that. Not that those aren't important things, but I firmly believe that evolution, or something very similar to evolution, is a guiding force throughout not guiding in the sense of conscious, but is a force throughout the universe. It is the reason why I believe that, given the circumstances, proper circumstances, that life will probably happen, and probably has happened in other parts of the universe. We just can't get to them yet, if ever, because the distances are staggering. But I also believe that there is an evolutionary type process involved in many, many things, including the literal formation of matter. How does this thing happen? Well, complexity tends to sort itself until it becomes something else. And oftentimes one of the things that moves to is an order, an anti-entropic order, but also a self-replicating anti-entropic order, which feeds off of entropy. This is a long, complicated subject, so I'm not going to get into it at great detail. But it reminds me of this fact that things tend to fill niches, or tend to expand when they can expand, that they will tend to become more complicated rather than less complicated. And of course, we are, at least in the short-term, small focus way, we are living examples of that, as we have created a society for ourselves that is literally in our faces all the time, day, night, day, is bombarding us with images to either sell us things or to convince us to observe things, which is another form of selling, because of course most of the internet is based on getting people to look at things. And as a result, the internet, not consciously, again, this is what the genius of Charles Darwin and evolution is about. These things are not conscious. These things are not guided or created. These things evolve over time. And I'm talking about, it's the same, pretty much the same damn process. It's the reason that back when mail, postal mail was the primary means of people contacting each other, that junk mail came along, just like parasitism in living creatures. Junk mail came along and became increasingly crafty with ways to get you to respond to them. But that's going on in your regular pursuit of information off the internet as well. There are images being sent out explicitly, like the little dangly thing on, a deep sea anglerfish or something, that are absolutely chosen because they are the most successful pictures at getting you to open an article, or phrases or whatever, because they're the most successful thing that will get you to open a piece of purported information. So we are living in the middle of this process, and because we don't officially recognize it, or we don't officially look at it and go, okay, how do we make this better? It's just going to continue and continue and continue until virtually, I am not by any means the first person to see this. I mean, Philip K. Dick saw this a long time ago with little flying advertisements that would get into your car and buzz around you, trying to get you to buy things or whatever. Or the Space Merchants, which was Frederick Pohl and, was it Henry Kuttner? I can't remember who the other writer was, but I mean, these are not original ideas to me, but my coupling them with evolution is something that I personally am very interested in, with an evolutionary type process. Anyway, I should slow down here because this is something I can talk about for days. I remember why I started this, because one of the reasons that I didn't get online and confirm that I was going to be reading last night until the last minute is because I had been contacted by somebody with a very kind of interesting sounding conference they were putting together, and it was a youngish guy, I think somewhere in Eastern Europe, and it was about horizontal societies and things like, not that's my term, but societies that were based on other forms of connection other than the old-fashioned kind, and they had a political and an economic take on it, and so I was waiting to hear back from them about some questions, and they had also asked me for a picture and some stuff, but that always takes a while to find. So I was waiting to hear back from them. And then yesterday, before this thing that was going to happen at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I might possibly have to cancel the reading for, I finally said, I still don't know about this or that or where it's going to be or whatever. I said I was interested, and this nice young man wrote back to me and said, well, you didn't send us your picture and your bio, so we figured you weren't interested. And I'm like, we live in this world of incredible complexity. I mean, I was happy because it meant I got to do my reading last night. But we live in this world of incredible complexity. And here's people that are like going basically, we had two crossing ideas, and the most incredible methods of communication that anything has ever seen, as far as we know, in the history of the universe. Certainly until we find something even better than what humanity has created. And yet, they took me off the list or canceled my part of the conference because I hadn't gotten them a photo, when my photos are all over the flippin' internet, and so are my bios. So leaving the politics of that aside, which is another issue entirely, like who should have to do these things. I understand they were busy, they're probably first timers putting a conference together. No shade being thrown at them, but it's just, it made me think about this, about how, this idea that we should all be ready at any moment to drop everything and communicate or do things or whatever, simply because we have this super fast technology that it's changed everybody's expectations. So my boomer-like and yet un-boomer-like reaction to all this is, stop. Slow down, please. I don't want to do it that way. If people want to communicate with me, let's do it in our own sweet time. Somehow people managed, the British Empire hit its greatest peak at a time when the only way to communicate was by letter. Excuse me. By letter or by semaphore, really literally. I mean, that was the only way that the British Navy could communicate. Semaphore and flags and sending letters and occasionally sending one boat to another boat. And yet that somehow they managed to do what they did, whether for good or bad. I'm not discussing the validity or kindness of the 18th and 19th century British Empire. But it is something to consider. We do not have to do everything in 5 seconds. We do not have to expect others to get back to us in 5 seconds. And the less we do that, the less stressed we will all be. And I guess that's what it comes down to. And I don't think that's just me being a boomer, although me being an old guy now is certainly part of it. But it's also just the fact that I'm a human being, and our human mechanism hasn't changed that much in tens of thousands of years. We are still physically very much the same creatures that were running around naked with maybe some stone tools, some Acheulean hand axes or something, 70, 80,000 years ago. So, calm down, world. Take a breath. Don't be in such a hurry. We don't need this huge bombardment of 24/7 information. Anyway, okay, so I wasn't going to get off on a tangent, but it seems to be what I do. I'm sure you've noticed that by now. Let me see if there's anybody else that I have missed who's checked in before I start reading. Barban, hello, good to see you. Angie, Sherry, Timothy Roberts, Chris Van Dahl, okay. And, Winter, hello, Winter. Let me see if there's anybody else I mentioned that I haven't said hello to. Chris Borden and Don Baker. And the familiar two more, which it always says. Okay, so having gone on that long, what will sound like a technophobic rant, but is actually something a little more complicated than that, I will continue to my reading. And y'all can forgive me if you want to, or ignore me if that's easier. Okay, the last thing, we had a section where Pasavalis and others, including Tiamat and Brother Aton. Tiamat and Brother Aton were talking about Brother Aton going south to go look for possibly Prince Josua, but mostly for the lost twins of Prince Josua and his wife Forsheva. At the same time, Pasavalis was in the chancellery, and all of these people got the news at the same time that Prince Morgan, the heir to the throne, had fallen off Yeldon's tower. And everybody rushed off to the chapel, where they found that he had not fallen off the tower. He had fallen down while on top of the tower and was going to be okay. Scrapes, bruises, a nasty ding on his head, etc., etc. So Miriamel and Simon, of course, showed up. Hyeldon's tower was forbidden, so they're not surprisingly ticked off at Morgan for having been there in the first place, which, as we all know, was the product of a number of bad decisions on Morgan's part, built on spite and pettiness and grumpiness and boredom, and self-pity. Always a bad combination. And that's what's going on. So he has just been carried up the stairs, they've just put him in a blanket. He's okay. He's talking to people. He's talked to his sister, or is about to talk to his sister, and they're carrying him upstairs to put him into bed because they've had him in the chapel when they first got him. And we are going to start from there. Tiamat and his wife and Brother Aton had all joined Morgan's blanket progress back to his bed upstairs. After Pasavalis had left the chapel, only the servants, Father Nullies, and the chapel folk remained. Nullies offered his sincere sorrow at what had happened, and Miri did her best to be gracious, but what she really wanted to do was go and tend her grandson. Even Simon's anger seemed beside the point to her. The accident had already happened. There was no sense stewing over it, fuming and cursing. But when she told Simon they should go and see that the prince was comfortable in his rooms, he balked. "You go if you want. I can't even look at him just now." Mary felt a flare of anger. "You did worse when you were his age." "That's different, Mary. I was not the heir to the throne. I wasn't a prince. I was just a kitchen boy. Nobody would have cared if I lived or died." "Some would," she said, softened by a memory. "I always thought you looked interesting." Simon loosened enough to laugh a little. "Interesting? Yes, I'm sure you looked at a gawky, red-haired scullion tripping over his own feet and thought, 'Oh, I'd like to have a long chat with that likely fellow.'" "No, that isn't what I thought." She could suddenly recall the very day she had first seen Simon, running across the inner keep like a clumsy young colt trying its first gallop, limbs going everywhere except where they should. "I thought, he looks so free, like he hasn't a care in the world. I wonder what that feels like." That's what I thought. "Well, at least you don't pretend you were caught by my handsome face." "I spent my life among handsome faces, first in Merriman, then here," she said. "But I'd never seen anyone who looked less like he cared what other people were thinking than you did." Now Simon laughed again, this time finding something more like his natural humor. "It wasn't that I didn't care at all about what people thought. I just kept forgetting, my dear one. Rachel always said that. It's not that you're purely foolish, boy. It's that you don't remember to be clever unless you're trying to get out of a punishment." "I know you miss her," Mary said, "but she scared me, always glaring at me like she knew I'd left a mess somewhere that she'd have to clean up." "Rachel the dragon, the chambermaid who glared at messy princesses." Simon nodded. "Yes, that's how she would have liked to be remembered." "Are you going to come with me to see Morgan?" Simon shook his head. "I've seen him. I'll let you treat with him for a bit, but you and I are going to have a talk about this. You do know that, don't you?" Miriam sighed. "Yes, I do. And I agree he deserves punishment, but I won't let you bully him." It's not punishment he needs, Mary. It's something different. He has to start acting like a man, not a child. Don't scowl like that. It makes you look like a child yourself. No, it makes you look like Morgan. It was true, she realized. Except for the hair color and the prince's lack of freckles, the resemblance was quite remarkable, especially when she remembered Simon at the same age. No wonder she had trouble staying angry at their feckless grandson. They parted in front of the royal chapel, the king to return to scheduling the assizes with Count Eolair. Before she left, Simon squeezed her hand to reassure her, a little message between the two of them, a way to be alone together, even when the whole court surrounded them. Next section. The guards and servants had carried Morgan out of the chapel and across the courtyard to reach the wider set of stairs, because Morgan had already complained several times about the pain of being jostled, but even on the wider steps it was difficult for the men at the top end of the blanket to walk upstairs backward while lifting the weight of the man-sized prince. As Pasquale watched, a pair of prisoners emerged from the guard-room near the base of the stairs, 2 men in irons accompanied by several Erkin guards. When they saw the fuss on the stairs, the 2 prisoners pushed their way toward it, ignoring the complaints from their guards, who seemed rather half-hearted about the exercise of their duty. The Lord Chancellor understood a moment later when he recognized the prisoners. "Ho there!" he called to the sergeant of the guards. "I see you have our friends, Sir Astrian and Sir Olveris." "And hello to you, Lord Pasquale," Astrian called out cheerfully. "Yes, we have been taken up for the terrible crime of enjoying a few drinks, and now we're on our way to listen to Lord Zachiel scold us." I can't remember if I said that should be Zachiel or Zachiel. I'm going to say Zachiel. "And now we're on our way to listen to Lord Zachiel scold us. But first we wanted to give the prince our best wishes for a swift recovery," said Olveris. With his dour, serious voice, he almost made it sound true. "Did you hear, fellas? I fell off Yeldon's tower," called Morgan from the depth of the carrying blanket. "Thumped my jaw, cracked all my ribs. I'm in terrible pain." But he was laughing a little breathlessly, as if it truly did hurt. "Tell Porto I shall be as feeble as he is after this." The prisoners shouted cheerfully after him as he was carried up the next set of stairs and then through a door into the residence. "All right, you," said the sergeant. "You paid your respects to the prince. What do you say we get moving?" "Just a moment, Sergeant," said Pasquale. "Yes, Lord Chancellor?" The guardsman looked down at himself quickly, perhaps checking for splotches of food or anything else that Pasquale might deem an offense against his position. "I will take these men. I have business with them." "But Lord Zachiel wants them brought to him." "I understand. Tell Zachiel I will release this pair of criminals to his justice when I've finished. But first I have a pressing matter to discuss with them both." The guard captain hesitated, plainly unhappy about relinquishing his prisoners, but even more unhappy with the idea of flouting the Lord Chancellor, one of the kingdom's most powerful men. Self-preservation won out over strict application of the rules. "Very well, my lord. If it's you who's taking responsibility, my lord." "I am. And you may tell Zachiel I said so. If he needs me to give him my seal on it, send someone over to my office in the Chancellery, and my secretary, Wiebert, will give it. I will make sure the prisoners are returned to your leader just as they are now, still a bit drunk and very stupid, and he may do what he likes. Hang them, if he pleases." "Oh, I don't think they'll hang, my lord." "No, probably not. More's the pity." "Are you going to give us a treat, then?" Astrian demanded. "Take us to the market and buy us each a meat pie." "You will be lucky if I do not have you both made into meat pies," said Pasquale as the guard captain handed over his charges. "Now march to the Chancellery, and don't dawdle." Aren't you going to take these fetters off? Asked Astrian. You must be jesting, said Pasivalius. I wish they were heavier. In the chancellery, Pasivalius banished Father Vibert and his other secretaries and clerics to the outer chambers so he could be alone with the two soldiers. He had known Astrian for a long time, since his days in Naban, and had known Ulvaris almost as long. He had seen them at their best and worst. He had never been so angry at either. What in the name of Saint Cornelius and all the other saints do you think you were doing? He could barely keep his voice low to avoid sharing his anger with everyone in the great chancellery building. You know you are not to leave Morgan alone, and especially not when he's getting into this kind of madness. He could have been killed. It is only by the grace of God that he was not. Astrian looked a little chastened, but not much. You told us he was drinking too much, my lord. We tried to get him to come with us to Zachiel's ceremony, but when he wouldn't, he shrugged. Well a day, what were we to do? What were you to do? Go with him, stay with him, and when he said, I'm going to climb that goddamned forbidden tower and fall off, you were to say, no, you're not, your highness. You're to stay with us. That's what you were supposed to do. What do you think I pay you lummox for? He's stubborn, offered Ulvaris. Stubborn? Of course he's stubborn. He's a spoiled boy, barely into manhood, whose boon companions are drunken idiots. Young men his age do stupid things. It is your job to prevent him from doing them. We try, began Astrian in a put-upon tone. Don't even start to make excuses. Pasivalius paced back and forth beside the table where months of accumulated work waited for him while he dealt with nonsense like this. Do you not understand how important that boy is? He is the heir to Prester John's kingdom, the whole of the high ward. After the king and queen, he is the most important person in this world. More important than his sacredness, the lector of Mother Church. He glared, daring either one of them to reply. Having caught the drift of the conversation, neither one did. What do you think would happen if the lector's horsemen's guard let the old man go climbing around on the roof of the Sansellin Aedonitis at night and fall off? Do you think they'd keep their posts? Or do you think they might be drawn and quartered in Galden Square in front of a shrieking mob? Well, what do you think? He didn't really fall off of the tower, Astrian said quietly. Not all the way off. Nothing around it but cobblestones. He'd have burst like a dropped egg. So that is your idea of successfully protecting the heir apparent. He only smashed his ribs and nearly broke his jaw, but he didn't burst like an egg. That's not what I mean, murmured Astrian. We understand why you're angry, my lord, said Ulvaris. No, I don't think you do, said Pasivalius, because you seem to think you're the only man I trust with this work. Believe me, I can find hundreds of men who could do a better job of it than you've managed. Do you really think I couldn't find someone better in the short time it would take to have you both taken to the headsman's block? Ulvaris at least looked a little pale, and a faint sheen of sweat dotted his olive skin. No, lord. No, lord, echoed Astrian, but enough! I am going to send you back to Zachiel. Vibert will take you because I am sick to my guts at the sight of you. And if you give either one of them any trouble, or even speak rudely, I will insist that Lord Zachiel put you in the deepest prison hole beneath the castle, behind the biggest lock he can find, and leave you there until you have rotted. Am I understood? Yes, lord, said Astrian. Yes, lord, said Ulvaris. Pasivalius walked to the outer chamber and called for his chief secretary. Go now, he said when he returned with the cleric, and whatever punishment Zachiel gives you, You will thank him and apologize. No, don't bother to say anything. I am sick of the sound of you both. Next section. After the other hangers-on had dispersed, after Lady Thalia and Tiamat were convinced that they had done all they could, and none of his injuries were serious, Morgan was left alone with only his squire, Melkin, a pair of servants, and his grandmother. I will never understand why you would do such a thing, Morgan. The queen was not just disappointed, but downright angry. As she had become more certain he was not badly hurt, her sympathies had dissipated. It had been a bit like watching a pot slowly boiling. Morgan could not even imagine what his grandfather was going to say, and was wondering how long he could avoid hearing it. What were you thinking? Talk to me. I don't know. He tried to roll over onto his side so he wouldn't have to look at her flushed, unhappy face, but his ribs hurt too much. I don't know. It just happened. We will talk about this tomorrow, after you have had a night's sleep. It's not even afternoon yet. Then, after you have had an afternoon's and a night's sleep. Your grandfather is very, very unhappy. Well, that's a surprise. Don't be rude, Morgan, and do not try to be humorous. It's really not a good idea at this moment. She put her hand on the side of his bed to steady herself as she stood. Sometimes the prince forgot that his grandmother was more than 50 years old, because she was quick to smile and almost girlish in her laughter. He knew he should feel bad for making her worry, but for some reason, seeing how slowly she stood after a long time sitting just made him feel even worse. Even stranger, it made him as angry as if she thumped him in the jaw herself. Sometimes it seemed like people only cared about him so they would have an excuse to be unhappy with him. Are you going now, grandmother? Yes. The life of the castle and the capital must go on, no matter what. She shook her head. I pray someday that you will learn that truth, Morgan. How everyone else must labor to preserve the kingdom you take for granted, to preserve your birthright. I don't take it for granted. But, in fact, he could think of nothing worse than having to spend his days like his grandmother and grandfather did, listening to bishops and merchants and nobles, everyone with their complaints and requests for favors, all of them bad-tempered and selfish. He thought he would rather be the meanest peasant in Erkenland, mowing grass in the sweat of his brow all day. At least then he wouldn't have to talk to fools. At least he wouldn't have to do favors for ungrateful people. But that was what his grandparents and his mother wanted for him. And then they wondered why he wasn't more pleased about it. Where is your mother? Said the queen as she paused in the doorway. Why isn't she here? Is it possible she hasn't heard? Morgan knew the question wasn't directed at him. He generally knew less about his mother's whereabouts than anyone else in the hayhold, so he didn't even bother to shrug. Well, she should be here. His grandmother sent one of the servants to the dowager princess to make sure she knew what had happened, then paused in the doorway outside, then paused in the doorway again, this time because a small, stout figure was waiting just outside. I have come to see the prince, said little Snenick. I am wondering about his healthiness, if he is well. He is, thanks to you, Morgan's grandmother said, although I'm sure the king and I would like to hear from you at some point what you are doing up there with him. I am being as sad and angry as can be at myself. The troll had an extremely serious expression on his round face. You may ask me any questioning you wish, Queen Majesty. Ask and ask and ask, and still I will answer more. Well, not now, the queen said, slightly flustered, and went out. Morgan sent Melkin and the remaining servants to wait outside. What did you tell them? He demanded of Snenick when they were alone. I could not say. Nothing had happened, friend Morgan. You were blooding from your chin and everywhere, elsewhere. I had to say you slipped and fell down, striking your head most painfully. That was true, but they must have seen that door. That hatch was open. Snennek shook his head. Excuse me. Snennek shook his head. I closed it before I went for help. Morgan let himself fall back, and only then realized that he had been clenching all his muscles for so long he could not remember when he started. Thank God! Oh, brave, clever Snennek! They would have had me in the dungeon if they found out I even thought about going inside the tower. But what happened to you? I couldn't find you when I got to the top. Where were you? A sudden memory jabbed him, dark and cold as a rusted spear point. Did you see the man in red? Snennek shook his head once more, his face puzzled. I did not see anyone. When I found the doorway open, leading down into the tower. So you weren't the one who opened it? No. With certainty, no, I would not have. I saw that it was open, though, and I was having much interest to take a quick look inside, so I was climbing down into the piles of rocks. It was foolish, because I was not careful to make certain climbing out would also have such easiness. But then, when I was inside, my thoughts began to grow strange. I think that happened to me, too. Do you think it was magic? From the Red Priest? Another question whose answer I am not knowing. For me, it was like dreaming. I thought I heard your voice, but so far away. And I saw things, confusing, without clearness, also like dreams, bad dreams. Snennek shook his head again, but this time as if to clear away bad thoughts. Then I realized I was back beneath the doorway in the roof again, and you were lying there above me with bleeding from your face. I climbed out and closed the doorway in the roof, then hurried down the rope and went to find others, because I was knowing I could not carry you myself. Snennek sighed. I am sorry if I have brought you trouble. It was not my intending. Morgan thought for a moment. You call me friend Morgan. Do you truly want to be my friend? I am your friend. I am meant to help you find your destiny. It is only your knowing it that we are waiting for, said Snennek with a crooked smile. Morgan couldn't quite puzzle this out, but he had other concerns. Then listen carefully. Whatever you do, don't tell anyone that hatch was open or that you went in. It's going to be bad enough as things are. Only heaven knows what punishment they're going to give me. But if you tell them you went inside Yeldon's tower, it's going to be 10 times as bad. Do you understand? Snennek was frowning. But I was thinking it would be good at least to tell Kina's father, Binabik. He is having much wiseness about such things. And what happened was very strange. No! Morgan realized that he was almost shouting. No, he said more quietly. Don't. If you're my friend, you won't tell anyone about it. Just keep saying what you said. That we were on the roof, and I slipped and fell and hit my head. Do you understand? Say you understand. Of course, I am understanding. You're my friend, aren't you? You say you're my friend. That is not being the point. Morgan, Prince. Just Morgan. Friends don't call each other Prince. You'll do what I ask, won't you? After all, there was no harm done. He gave the troll a look he hoped was sincere. Please? Please tell me you won't say anything to anyone. Little Snennek took a deep breath. His face was troubled, His shoulders rounded. At last he said, "If that is your wish." "It is," said Morgan, relieved. "Oh, it most certainly... oh, it most certainly, definitely, absolutely is. Not a word to anyone." He raised himself up a little again, despite his painful ribs. "Did you really not see him?" "I heard you were speaking about it when I found you. You too were sounding like someone dreaming. But no, I saw no one but you and myself. Perhaps because you gave your head a hit, you were dreaming. No, I saw him, and it was before I fell. It was horrible," said Morgan. "He was horrible. Face all shriveled, eyes all black. I think it was the Red Priest himself, or his ghost. I think it was Pryrates." "Then should not someone know of that? Your great-parents, or Binabik?" "No." Morgan had no doubt about it whatsoever. "No. That would be the worst thing that could happen. The very worst thing." Chapter 34. Feeding the Familiar. They met on Blackwater Field. They met on Blackwater Field, the great square at the edge of the mists, where the mighty waters of Kigarasku, the Tearfall, crashed down the broad basalt face of the Heartwall before disappearing into the mountain's unplumbed depths. No crowd had gathered there, just Vieki, his troop of builders, and their escort of sacrificed soldiers. And no cheering throng lined the broad glinting passage as they made their way through the city and toward the gates of the mountain. Only war parties marched out openly before the people of Nakiga, and this was not one of those. But Vieki was less certain about what kind of company it truly was, and the silence of their departure only made his unease stronger. He had never before led a work party that required such a heavy military guard. His workers and engineers numbered more than 100, but twice that many stony-faced sacrifices accompanied them. Where, in the Queen's northern lands, would builders need so much protection, even with their High Magister as part of the company? It was all so strange, so unprecedented, and since his last journey into the depths, the haunting words of Omu, the Whisperer, would not leave his thoughts. "To save what you love, you will be forced to kill that which you love even more." What could that mean? Would he have to murder Soja, or even his beloved only child, Nezaru, to save his people? He could not even imagine such a thing without feeling ill. If anyone else had said it, he would have thought it nonsense, but Omu had come back from outside of life itself. He could not easily convince himself she was mistaken. "I am the head of my clan, and the High Magister of a great order," he told himself. "If the life of the Hikitaya is truly in my hands, I will have to harden myself to any deed that will save our race." "Your pardon, great master," said Ryugo. Chief of Vieki's household guards, he had never before had to deal with quite so many soldiers from the Order of Sacrifice, and was having trouble hiding his unease. "Forgive my forwardness, but when are we to know our destination? I ask not from undue curiosity, but only so that I may perform my duty and make certain your august personage will be safe." "You will know soon after I know," Vieki told him. He could not miss a flicker of eye-white here and there among the other guards as they traded glances, disturbed by such vagueness. Hikidaya liked order, and none of them liked it better than celebrants and sacrifices. Ryugo finally seemed to have conquered his troublesome feelings. "Thank you, great master," he said, face expressionless, then let his horse fall back into line. Vieki did not know where they were bound or exactly what they were doing, because that was the way the Queen wanted it, but that did not mean he was content in his ignorance. Nobody could hold a position like his without giving at least some thought to precisely what they were told not to think about. But such illicit considerations, of course, could not be shared, not even with other magisters. To be one of the Queen's chief servitors was, in many ways, to lead a very lonely life. Perhaps this solitude is the garden's way of keeping me strong for my Queen. After all, the mother of the people has no contemporaries, and there are few who can even remember the early days in this land. It must be far more difficult for her than for any mere minion. How much strength she shows to put up with such loneliness for all our sakes. The soldiers at the great front gates of the city stood in respectful silence as Viecki's company filed past them and out of the mountain. It was strange to think what a short time had passed since the mountain had collapsed, sealing Nakiga inside and saving them from destruction at the hands of vengeful mortals. Many seasons had passed before the builders could dig out the entrances to the city, but for the long-lived Hikedaya, that had been the merest moment. Viecki did not like to think about the mountain's fall, though. He still carried secrets from that time. Deadly, dangerous secrets. They crossed the trampled plain that had once been the Field of Banners, then continued down the old royal way through the ruins of the old city outside the gates, past dry canals and fallen bridges, until they reached the bank of the ice flame. Instead of crossing it, they turned to follow the river's banks toward the crumbled remnants of the walls that had once defended Nakiga that was, following the river east. Despite the rebuilding of large parts of the old city during the Queen's sleep, this outer section was still largely empty, inhabited only by animals and a few broken slaves, too useless to drag back to the fields or to their masters' manors. These escapees lived like pigeons, peering down from the roofs at Viecki's company, darting in and out of unlocked upper stories. They believed they were avoiding recapture by their own cleverness, but Viecki knew they were simply not worth the time or effort from the Queen's soldiers that it would take to round them up. It reminded him of a poem from Shunyasu's forbidden book. We believe that our actions thwart fate, that we extend our lives each day by guile and brave struggle. But the minions of mortality are only overwhelmed by this busy season, and swiftly enough they will catch up their work again. Buyo, the commander of the Sacrifice Legion meant to guard Viecki's builders, slowed his horse until the Magister caught up. Beside Viecki, Ryugo straightened in his saddle, but the commander showed no interest in him, instead addressing Viecki directly, albeit with proper deference. Your pardon, High Magister, but we approach the outer gates. It was hard to miss the immense tumbled ruins of the outer walls that loomed before them, but Viecki only inclined his head in acknowledgement. I see them, Commander Buyo. The Sacrifice touched his chest. Forgive me for my terrible rudeness, Magister Viecki, but I am directed to say that once we pass out of Nakiga that was, and until we reach the borders of our land, where you will be given the Queen's orders, you and your men must do only what I say. Your safety is my utmost concern. Heard and accepted, Commander. Buyo nodded again and made a stiff gesture of respect. Thank you, High Magister. Soon, I am sure, all will be clear to you, and then you will direct me once more as befits your station. On the far side of the gates, instead of the open, empty land that Viecki had expected, he was surprised to see an entire company waiting for them. For an unnerving instant, he thought it might be a Northman ambush, but he soon saw that those waiting were all Hikedaya, armored sacrifices as well as some from other orders. Was there to be yet another ceremony? Had the near endless ritual, pledges, and prayers at Blackwater Field not been enough for one day? Two figures stood apart from the soldiers. As he examined them, Viecki's unease grew. One was tall and imposing, with ornamented black armor that showed him to be a high-ranking sacrifice officer. The other, smaller figure was clearly from the House of Song. The arrogant posture gave it away, as surely as the hooded robe. Who could this odd pair be, Viecki wondered, and why did they wait for him? Did they bring some bad news that had missed him at home? Had something happened to his daughter, Nezeru, or had Viecki himself been undone by some unexpected treachery from Akinabi? But why would the Lord of Song wait until such a late moment? Viecki reined up and did his best to wait patiently, hiding all feeling behind the mask of his position. "High Magister Viecki, we have been waiting for you," said the small, slender one, executing a shallow bow. The voice was female. "I give you greetings from my master, Lord Akhenabi. I am host singer Sogeyu." She then indicated her tall, sharp-featured companion. "And this is General Kikiti of the Order of Sacrifice." The general inclined his head. Viecki knew Kikiti, as did most of Nakiga, from his vigorous suppression of dissent during the Northmen siege of their mountain. Some people claimed as many had died at the hands of Kikiti's warriors as had been killed by the mortals. "And why are you here?" Viecki asked. "To accompany you," said Sogeyu, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. She drew back her hood to reveal a shaved head like an acolyte's and an unmasked face, but Viecki could tell from her spare, thin-skinned features that the host singer was by no means young. "In fact, I carry your orders from the Mother of All, which I will give you when the time comes." "My orders?" Viecki was caught by surprise. "But I thought that Commander Buyo was going to give them to me." Sogeyu showed the closest thing to a smile that singers generally revealed, a slight thinning of the lips to denote amusement, though her eyes remained as hard and lifeless as blackstone. "Oh, no, Magister. Your mission is too important to be entrusted to mere legion commanders. Our all-knowing queen and my master wish to be sure these important directives are given directly to you at the proper moment." "Without leaving the hands of the Order of Song, you mean," Viecki thought, caught between the deep unease at all that was strange here and anger at how he was being manipulated. "Does this mean you too will accompany me to the edge of our lands?" "Oh, and beyond, great Magister." Again the tiniest stretching of the mouth, but the host singer was not being so openly expressive by accident, Viecki knew. A message was being sent. But what does she mean by beyond? Where are we bound? The additional troop of singers and sacrifices fell in behind them. As Viecki's troop marched out past the last of the ruined walls and into the wilderness around the derelict outer city, the Magister did his best to recover some kind of equanimity. "I do not understand what is happening here," he thought. "But for you, great Mother of All, I will go anywhere, do anything. May the memory of the garden preserve you and all the people." And so Viecki Se Enduya, Lord of the Builder's Order, rode out of Nakiga and into the wide world, a world that he knew hated him and all his kind. And that's where we're going to stop, because that's the end of a section. So why start a new one? Okie dokie. So it is now almost 8 o'clock. As I think I've done today, I have managed to dominate a huge chunk of the reading time with Babel, which is one of my specialties. Carries over into my writing as well, so I have continued to dominate with written Babel after spoken Babel. And that's me, the original Tower of Babel. and that's Babel with two B's. Anyway, so with that, I am going to sign off for the evening and retreat to my whatever I have in the refrigerator that I can eat. I will see you all next week, and both at the same regular times, now made even more regular by the return of daylight savings, but still the same TAD time, same TAD channel, 7 p.m., 1 a.m. on Sundays. Until then, take good care of yourselves. That is an order. Take good care of yourselves. Take good care of your friends and loved ones. Help other people when you can, because we need each other. Honest Injun, we certainly do. So that's where I am. I hope that's where you're at, and I will see you very soon. Peace and love and all that stuff. Okay, good night.